when they put out every single fire, was it a 24-hour period that they went from? Like, how long a period was it that you said, like, from, was it dawn to dusk or what?
Yeah. It was put out at night and then started the next morning. All of them were, every fire was extinguished from like noon on. They put out all the fires, so that night there was no fire. Okay? By the way, an interesting point that I'll touch on it now. We may cover it a little bit more in depth later. The Maya divided each day into 13 hours, not 24 hours. 13 hours. And then they divided those 13 hours, notice 13 intentions. Then they divided the 13 hours into what we would call minutes. Then they divided those 13 minutes into what we would call seconds. And then they divided those 13 seconds by 13, and that by 13, and that by 13, and that by 13, and 13, and 13, and 13, to where every single moment was individually divided by 13. Infinitely. That was their understanding. So, this was very, very central to the Maya's understanding. Note, there are no planets or moons or anything going around our sun every 260 days. There are no planets or moons or any objects going around every 360 days either. Although I guess it's a coincidence that every planet and every galaxy throughout the whole universe, all of them spin in 360 degrees. Our calendar only has to do with our speck of mud going around this little speck of light we call the sun in a sea of 100 billion stars in this one galaxy out of 100 billion galaxies in the universe. So how big is our calendar? Our calendar is completely insignificant. On the other hand, these guys were looking at something a lot bigger. Now, there's a fella by the name of Carl Johan Kallman. He's a Swedish microbiologist. For 30 years, he's worked in laboratories, looking through microscopes at smaller and smaller particles or parts of life. Okay, very exacting, meticulous work. Most of his work had to do with entomology, with pollution and its effects on the cell and how it causes diseases. That's most of his work. And he was inspired by a visit down to the Maya lands to start studying the Mayan calendar. He took it up as a hobby to begin with, but he started studying it with his clinical techniques to find out what he could prove about the calendar rather than what he thought or conjectured about the calendar, which is what's all been going on so far. All the archaeologists have their own idea, and they kind of match up with other people's ideas about what this was all about. Mr. Kallman took a different route. I myself am an artist, a sculptor. I'm not an archaeologist or didn't even go to school much. I'm an artist, and I was approaching the calendar from more of a heart space or intuitive space. And when I came up with this, Kallman saw it in Sweden, and he sent me this. And we eventually met in Cancun. And when we put our two informations together, the product is this talk. Okay? What Kallman found is what these guys were timing. They certainly weren't timing any physical cycles of things in our solar system. What were they timing? Okay. there's a stone in a place called Koba. I hope you can see this. Maybe you can focus in with the camera on this, so at least it's on the video. This is only one side of the stone. It actually goes over and down like this. It's big. This thing stands 12 feet high out of the ground. I don't know how much it goes into the ground, but it's 12 feet high. It's over 7 feet wide. It's that thick. Big rock. The archaeologists found it in the late 40s, laying face down in the jungle. And when they stood it up, it had all these carvings all over it, all these Mayan dates, and a king who stands right here. But all of these dates have to do with the Tune calendar. It's numbers of those cycles, okay? Numbers of times those cycles have happened. And it's big, big numbers. We'll be talking about it in a minute. When the stone was first stood up, the archaeologists did a rubbing, a charcoal rubbing. And it's a good thing they did, because when the stone dried out from having laid in the jungle for so long, it just, you can't read it now. Madeline and I have been there. We stood right by the stone. I kissed the stone. I really did. And you can't read anything on it. In fact, when it was first rubbed, the archaeologists didn't know what it meant either. But since we have been translated the writing, and now we can read it with the aid of computers, you can read it just like a newspaper. And what that stone says is the structure of the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar is in 9 different levels. Okay, does that look like a pyramid to you? That's good. That's why all those pyramids down there are all 9 levels. Because those big structures that the Maya built out of stone were ceremonial centers to approximate or to show people the progression up this ladder or up these steps. I'm going to write bigger. It also shows that each one of these levels is subdivided into 13 individual sections. Now there goes that top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the Mayan calendar, there are 7 periods of light in each one of these levels. There's 7 periods of light. And there's 6 periods of dark. 7 days and 6 nights to each level of creation. Where have we heard that before? Genesis? As a matter of fact, the Mesopotamians and the Sumerians, the first people to wrote in cuneiform on clay tablets that each level of creation had 7 days and 6 nights. So the Maya weren't the first people to have this information. There were other civilizations earlier. But the Maya were the most recent ancient civilization. They left the freshest tracks, which is why Coleman and I have picked up on it.